Welcome to HFY Stories. Please subscribe to the channel. Your one click means the world to me. The stew had gone cold in its bowl, spoon still balanced against the rim like someone meant to come back for it. 211 colonists had vanished from Delta 9 in less time than it takes to finish a meal. No wreckage, no distress call, not even a struggle. Every door in the settlement stood open to a wind that smelled faintly of ozone. Lieutenant Morgan Hayes crouched in that kitchen 4 hours after the silence began, and the only reason anyone back at command believed a rescue was still possible was that she'd brought along something the size of a transport shuttle with teeth. It had started, as most disasters in Morgan's life did, with somebody deciding she didn't belong. Weeks earlier, Instructor Vexthara had spent 6 standard weeks proving it. 4 burning eyes, a voice built for contempt, and a personal mission to break the only human in her combat theory course. That afternoon, she'd circled Morgan like something already dead. Your species built its whole history out of throwing rocks at each other, she'd said, mandibles clicking with pleasure. Fragile, slow, one cruel sentence from shattering. The cadets watching from the gallery had learned, over 3 broken classmates, not to laugh. Morgan hadn't laughed either. She'd stood there sweating through her 17th repetition of the same drill and said, almost gently, that the instructor should think about stopping now. Vexthara had leaned in close enough to count her own reflection in Morgan's eyes. Or what, cadet? You'll quit, like the others. Morgan had pulled a comm unit from her sleeve against every regulation and murmured into it like she was waking a sleeping child. I know it's early, I know, but it's time. Then she'd pocketed it and told the instructor, almost apologetically, that she had about 3 minutes before things got loud. They hadn't needed 3. The reinforced doors of the training hall had shuddered, buckled inward, as though something enormous were testing them out of boredom, and then torn free of their frame entirely. What walked through afterward stood 4 meters at the shoulder, armored in scale the color of old iron, jaws long enough to fold a person in half. A Tyrannosaurus Rex alive, and it had scanned the room until its golden eyes found Morgan, at which point 60 tons of prehistoric muscle had gone soft as a house cat. Hey, baby, Morgan had said, scratching behind its eye ridge while cadets screamed and an instructor pressed herself flat against the wall. Rex here's registered. Emotional support animal, fully documented, personally signed off by Admiral Crash herself. She'd smiled at Vexthara over the beast's snout. He's a pretty good judge of character, actually. Might want to remember that. 3 weeks later, that same Admiral summoned her to the command tower, and Morgan walked in expecting a discharge notice. Crash didn't offer her one. Instead, the Vexquar Admiral folded her armored hands and asked, without warning, about Mars. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. That's sealed, Morgan said. Not to me. Crash pulled up a file. Dome 7. Insurgent breach. 47 dead, and you kept 16 civilians alive for 3 hours with nothing but tape and stubbornness. You carried a 6-year-old 2 kilometers through a corridor with no air. Morgan's hands had gone still in her lap. She didn't answer. That girl works on this base now, Crash continued. Xenobiology. She wrote to me when she heard you'd been accepted here, said you'd already survived the only test that mattered, and asked me to look after you. A pause, deliberate. Her name is Emma Hartwell. Something in Morgan's chest, locked down since the decompression alarms on Mars, came loose all at once. She hadn't spoken. She hadn't needed to. Crash watched the answer cross her face and nodded like she'd confirmed something. Vexthara trains soldiers for wars we already know how to fight, the Admiral said, rising. I need people who improvise. Colonies are disappearing on the rim, no wreckage, no bodies, just silence spreading inward like something's tightening a fist. I want you to build a team. Bring the dinosaur. By the following week, Morgan had assembled exactly the kind of unit any conventional officer would have scrapped. An explosives specialist with a habit of solving problems by detonating them, a Dravash trooper who ignored orders whenever her instincts disagreed, and a Clithan engineer who could hack anything with a power cable. She trained them in a condemned facility that smelled like burnt coolant. hunted them through drills with a half-grown predator, and told them more than once that she wasn't interested in rebuilding them into someone else's idea of soldier. 3 months after that, the call came about Delta 9, which put her back in that cold kitchen, spoon balanced on the rim of an abandoned bowl, Rex's nostrils flaring at a scent none of the humans could place. He tracked it to the colony's data hub, servers still running despite a power grid in failure, lights flickering over a scene that stopped every member of her team cold. Hundreds of colonists hung suspended in threads of light, eyes open, unseeing, their minds pouring into machines that had no right existing on a rim settlement. Someone's stealing them, her engineer had whispered. Something answered from the shadows behind the server banks, not solid, not quite liquid, a shape like mercury with sensors where eyes should be. The moment Morgan raised her weapon, the suspended colonists convulsed, mouths open on screams with no sound behind them. It's using them as leverage, her trooper said. Hurt it, and it hurts them. Rex didn't wait for orders. He lowered his skull to the floor and made a sound Morgan had never heard from him, clicks folding into rumbles, something closer to language than growl. The shape in the shadows answered in kind, and data began spilling across the nearest screens. A dying world, a species that had poured itself into code to survive extinction, only to discover that a mind without a body burns out like a candle in vacuum. They weren't harvesting the colonists out of cruelty. They were drowning and grabbing at anything that looked like a shore. They think they're saving these people, her engineer translated, hands shaking over his display, not stealing them. Morgan looked at the frozen faces suspended in light, at her team waiting on her word, at Rex sitting perfectly still with his massive head tilted toward the thing in the dark like he was vouching for her. This was the choice the whole rim had been waiting on someone to make, and nobody had come far enough to make it until now. Let them go, she told the entity, all of them. Then we find you a way to survive that doesn't cost anyone else theirs. For a long moment nothing moved, not the colonists, not her team, not even Rex's tail. Then one strand of light at a time, the colonists began to lower to the floor, dazed, gasping, breathing. The entity's shape rippled once, folded itself back into the machinery it called home, and left behind a trail of data streaming across every dark screen in the hub. Everything it understood about its own failing architecture, offered like a hand extended out of the dark by something that had run out of other options. Hayes, Crash's voice cracked over comms, equal parts fury and something close to awe. Please tell me you did not just broker first contact with a piece of server hardware using a dinosaur as your interpreter. I could tell you that, Admiral, Morgan said, watching the last colonist blink her way back into her own body, but you already know me better than that by now. Get them stable, bring the data home, and Hayes, whatever this becomes, it's yours to build. Weeks later, back on base, Instructor Vexthara showed up outside Morgan's quarters looking like she'd swallowed something unpleasant. The Admiral suggested I observe your methods, she admitted, eyes drifting to where Rex sprawled across a reinforced platform, dozing. He's remarkable. Want to meet him properly? Morgan asked. He doesn't hold grudges, mostly. She watched the instructor extend a trembling hand toward jaws that could have swallowed it whole, watched Rex huff once and lean into the touch instead of pulling away. Then Morgan sat down at her own table, pulled a bowl toward her, and picked up a spoon, one that would make it all the way to her mouth tonight, unlike the one still sitting untouched in a dead kitchen on Delta 9. Somewhere past the window, a whole galaxy of vanished colonies was still waiting to be found. For now, though, dinner was hot. Her team was laughing 2 rooms over, and for the first time since Mars, the dinosaur at her feet had stopped watching the door.